Hey everybody, Crow back again with our Evercade video. This time we're going to be looking at Namco Museum Collection 1. This is the number 2 cartridge, and since I did cover the 3 cartridges that were in my Evercade premium bundle, which was the 1, 3, and 4 cartridge, I kind of want to go back and do all of them in numerical order. I do have all 10 of them that were released up to this point, but if you're curious what the Evercade is this little handheld device right here. It does take these cartridges, and I'm going to put a link in the description below to the video where I picked this up and gave you my initial impressions, and apparently I'm really liking it because I've decided to collect all these cartridges. These cartridges are about $20 each. This one in particular has 11 games, and they're mostly NES/Famicom games. There's a couple of Super Nintendo games in there, and also a single Sega Genesis game. And what I like to do is we're going to talk about each one of these just for a little bit, and I'm going to give it a score, rated or ranked from 1 to 5. 5 being what I consider to be a really great game, something I really enjoy playing. 4 being a good game, a game I still enjoy playing, but could use improvement here or there. 3 would be an okay game, a game that doesn't really sway me one way or another. A 2 is what I consider to be a poor game. Maybe a game that I don't really like very well, but maybe I'll go back to it and try it again. And a 1 is what I consider to be just a flat out bad game, a game I do not want to go back and play for any reason whatsoever. And again, these ratings are just my own personal opinion. I'm not trying to take any public consensus of this. I'm trying to be as fair as possible, but for my own taste. So there may be a game in there where you would think it's a really, really good game, but if it doesn't really interest me that much, maybe I'll give it a lower score. And also these scores are related to the games on the Evercade itself. So without any further ado, let's get started with the first game on this cartridge here. Alright, the first game on the cartridge is Battle Cars from 1993. This is a 16-bit Super Nintendo game. You can definitely tell it's a Super Nintendo game because the main focus of gameplay relying on the Mode 7. But what I found unusual about this is that this game was only released in the US. There is no Japanese or European release. This was only released in the US, and I'd never played it before, so when I jumped into it, I kind of didn't like this initially. But as I started getting into it more and I started to understand how to play it and drive, this game actually quite grew on me. This is like if you took F-Zero and mashed it together with Mario Kart and you get something completely different. Each stage is comprised of 2 different races. In the first race, you're basically just trying to destroy as many cars as you can before crossing the finish line without letting time run out, and that in turn earns you money and credits to buy upgrades for your car. And then the next race, you actually race against an opponent that you have to beat to proceed to the next level. And it just repeats again and again after that. And if you for some reason fail that race, you could go back and retry the other race to earn more credits and money to upgrade your car to hopefully succeed and pass to the next level. It's something that doesn't really get frustrating because if you lose, you can upgrade your car if you just play a little bit more. And with the save states, this game fits in perfectly on the Evercade. Now, that being said, I did enjoy this game, but it seems like there could be tweaks here or there that could improve the game a bit. It's just the same music that constantly plays. The game could let you know a little bit better about what's going on, what you're actually doing, because I kind of had to learn through trial and error and reading up on additional documentation and facts from GameFAQs to figure out what the hell was going on and how I earned upgrades and stuff. But once you know how to play the game, it's certainly fun. So I'm going to give this one a 4. Next up is Dig Dug from 1985. This is the 8-bit Famicom version, because this game was not released in the US. So in case you're not familiar with Dig Dug, you are a guy that digs in the ground and you use a pump to inflate and explode your opponents. You could also defeat them by dropping rocks on them, which is one of the reasons I quite like this game. I like dropping rocks on them. Drop 2 rocks and you get a bonus point item that appears in the middle of the screen. As I was playing this game, I realized just how much fun this is, and even though this is not the arcade version, but in fact the NES version, I liked it just as much as the arcade version. Again, arcade version is superior, but still, if we're stuck with console games on the Evercade, we could do much worse. So I had a ball playing this one with the save states. You save state between every level. You could really see how far you can get. I really enjoyed this one. I'm giving this one a 5. Game 3 is Galaxian. This is the 8-bit Famicom version from 1984. And again, this is another Famicom game that was not released in the US on the NES. So Galaxian may be better known as the precursor to the more popular Galaga, which is actually on Namco Museum Collection 2. But to me, both Galaxian and Galaga are totally different games. Galaxian is a game that really relies on precision and accuracy because you're only allowed one shot on the screen at a time. So if you miss the alien bugs that you're shooting for, you have to wait for that bullet to disappear off the screen before you can shoot again. But if you hit your target, you're able to fire more quickly. So this game really makes you rely on what colored bugs are going to do what when they come down at you. And sure, you can shoot at them while they're hovering in the swarm high above you, but you're actually awarded more points the closer they are to your ship when you shoot them. So there's a bit of a risk-reward factor going on here. This is a fantastic game, and it holds up very well against its arcade counterpart. So yeah, while the arcade version would be the preferred version, this Famicom version here isn't too much of a disappointment at all. I still got to give this one a 5. I had a blast playing it on the Evercade. Game 4 is Libble Rabble. This is a 16-bit Super Famicom game from 1994, and I have to stress, yes, this is the Super Famicom version because I've seen other YouTubers talk about this game claiming that the arcade version is on the Evercade, but that's simply not the case. I think they're thrown off by the fact that if you go into the options menu, it shows the options as if you're flipping dip switches. But if it was the arcade version, the dip switches wouldn't be in the menu. They'd actually be on the circuit board. Plus, I did do some comparisons. This is definitely a Super Famicom game. Yeah, it's a game that was never released in the US, so this is only a Super Famicom release. Oh, and by the way, the Evercade menu incorrectly lists this as an 8-bit game. So I was actually quite excited to try this out because the gameplay looked pretty amazing to me. You are actually controlling 2 arrows at the same time. You're actually controlling the red arrow with the D-pad and the blue arrow with the buttons. And the whole goal is to navigate both. You have a piece of string or something between you and enclose areas. And if you enclose monsters, you kind of defeat those monsters and gather points from them. You can uncover treasure. You get basically a lot of points by just using that string to enclose areas. And you could actually use the sides of the border to enclose areas as well, so that was quite helpful once I figured that out. And I don't know if it was because I was looking forward to playing this so much, but I was kind of disappointed by this. My brain really couldn't navigate both arrows at the same time. I kept forgetting which color was moved by which side of the controller, and at the end of the day, I just kind of was getting frustrated by the game. This is just definitely not a game for me. It seems like a really good idea, but it just, for me, was a little bit too frustrating to control. I'm going to give this one a 3. If I could figure out the controls a bit better, I might score it higher, but for right now, I just can't give it a higher score. Game 5 is Mappy. This is an 8-bit Famicom game from 1984, and yes, here we have another Famicom game that was not released in the US or EU for that matter. And again, this is another arcade port where you control a mouse who basically bounces on trampolines, collecting all the items in the level and opening doors while avoiding the cats that are after him, I guess, for some reason. I'm not really up on the story on this one. Is Mappy a police officer that's collecting the stolen goods from the cats? Is that what's going on here? And if the cats get them, well, yeah, you know, cats beat mice, that's how it works. But the gameplay is what's really interesting about this, because if you come in contact with a cat, you obviously die, except if you're in mid-air bouncing up and down on a trampoline, they can't hurt you. So you've got to navigate the maze using the trampolines to avoid the cats. Sometimes you could open up one of those big wooden doors and sonic wave will shoot out, and you could defeat the cats that way, although they will respawn. But you also have to be careful of which way the doors will open, because if you open the door the wrong way, you might get pushed back into a cat. It's an interesting game. Not one of my favorites, but I definitely could see myself coming back to this one again and again. I gotta give this a good score. Not something that blows my mind or anything, but yeah, it's good. It's definitely better than okay. Game 6 is Mappy Kids. This is another 8-bit Famicom game. This one's from 1989. Yes, this is another Japanese-only release that is here on the Evercade. And even though this is kind of a sequel to Mappy, it plays completely differently. In fact, you don't even play as Mappy. You play as his son, Happy, who you control in the game like a regular side-scrolling platformer. You could jump up, kick treasures open, kick monsters. Now, before I go any further, I have to explain the plot of this game because it's completely ridiculous. Your father, who is Mappy, tells you via letter to come over to meet this girl, and while you're coming over, why don't you build her a house? So you're doing just that, and that's why you're collecting the treasure in the game, so you can trade that treasure in for items to build a house. Now, I didn't get very far in the game, but I'm guessing that your goal is to actually have the house built by the time you get to the end of the game. But honestly, this isn't that great of a game. Now, if it just stuck to the side-scrolling platformer thing, that would be fine, but there's a lot of things in this game that really don't make sense, and there's a lot of unforgiving elements in the game as well. Not to mention the fact that in between every level, you wind up pulling a slot machine, which doesn't make any sense because you're always going to match 3 anyway, and you don't even get that item. The item it shows is the item you could get if you win the little mini game you have to play, which is completely random, and some of them I never even figured out how to play. But not only that, but if you fail the mini game, not only do you not get the item, but they just take away money from you anyway. So it's a little bit frustrating, but I also don't think it's a completely terrible game. I'm just going to go middle of the road on this one and give it a 3. I mean, I just need to play this one more, and maybe I could figure more out about it, but my initial impressions are just, okay. Game 7 is Metal Marines. This is the 16-bit Super Nintendo version, released in 1993. And perhaps I'm not the best person to give an opinion on this game, because this is a real-time strategy game, and that is just one genre of game that I'm not a big fan of. But I worked my way through it. I figured out how to play it a bit, although the manual does not give you any idea of what to do. I actually had to look up a strategy guide online, and also really helped to actually look up other reviews of this game on YouTube before I could figure out what the hell I was going to be doing in this game. But basically, your base is on an island, the opponent's base is on another island, and you basically have to build up missiles and anti-aircraft missiles and other things, and giant robots, which are the Metal Marines, and you basically shoot and fire onto the other island and figure out where your enemies' bases are and whatnot, and they're doing the same thing to you. It seems like you could attack at any time you want, but you also have to build up your resources and money, and just typical real-time strategy stuff, and I'm not a big fan of that kind of thing. But I did manage to figure out enough to pass the first level of the game. I guess you just have to destroy and convert one of your enemy's bases to win, although I think the computer has to destroy all 3 of your bases, so you're given a bit of an advantage at first. But one level of this is really all I could take. Again, I could come back to this again later. It's not terrible, and it is something I'm able to figure out, and maybe it's just going to be one of those rare exceptions that maybe I do like this in the future. But as it is, I'm just going to give this a rating of 3 for right now. It's definitely not a poor game by any stretch of the imagination, but I definitely can't give it a good rating because I can't really see myself coming back to this one anytime soon. Game 8 is one of the most popular video games of all time. It is Pac-Man. This is the 8-bit Famicom/NES version that was originally released in 1984 in Japan and many years later in the US. So odds are you know what Pac-Man is and that this is a port of an immensely popular arcade game where you control a yellow guy running around a maze gobbling up all the dots and avoiding all the monsters in the maze. But if you eat a power pellet, the ghosts turn blue and you're able to eat them up for a limited time, and you basically just clear maze after maze after maze. The maze does not change. This is again the precursor to all the other Pac-Man sequels out there, Miss Pac-Man, Pac-Man Jr., Super Pac-Man, and so on and so forth. And a lot of people say, hey, Miss Pac-Man's my favorite, but you know what? My favorite is actually Pac-Man Plus, which was never actually got a home conversion. But I actually really do like the original Pac-Man. This isn't a bad port at all, although if you were to compare the Nintendo version versus the arcade version, you will see some differences in the AI programming here or there, and the speed is a little bit different as well. Just minor nitpicks that you see from ports of this ilk. But you know what? I still got to give this one a 5. It's still an immensely fun and popular game on just about any platform you play it on. Game 9 is Quad Challenge, a 16-bit Genesis title from 1991 and the only Genesis/Mega Drive title on the cart. So I didn't have high hopes for this one to begin with, just looking at the screenshot. But yeah, it's a split screen racer where you're racing these ATV vehicles, and every race you have an opponent. You must beat a single opponent, even though there are multiple opponents on the track. I don't understand why this isn't set up as just a normal race. But no, you have to beat one opponent in particular. And what I thought was kind of funny though too is when I was picking out my vehicle, I was like just selecting my favorite color without realizing that each of the colors are different characteristics for each machine. Some of them are automatic transmission, some of them are manual transmission. So you have to pick based on the stats you want, not the color you want, which is kind of odd. But in the game itself, you're always fixed with this split screen image, which is great if you are playing two-player, but you know, you can only play one player with the Evercade. So the bottom portion of the screen is always relegated to what the CPU is driving. And in general, everything's just mediocre about this game. It's just, you know, plays normally. Occasionally there are bumps. You fly up in the air and you land. No big whoop. There's really nothing exciting about this game. You just drive carefully, try not to spin out and win, go on to the next race, and just keep repeating while your opponent gets more and more tougher. It's just a bland game all the way around, and it just seems like no effort was put into this game to make it the least bit exciting. So I'm just going to give this one a 3. I don't think it's particularly poor, although I could easily argue that route, but I'm just going to give this one the benefit of the doubt, give it a 3, and move on. Game 10 is Star Luster. This is an 8-bit Famicom game that was released in 1985. Yes, another Famicom game that never made its way to the US. And oddly enough, this is actually a game I have in my collection, so I kind of knew what I was doing going into it. This actually reminds me of a game called Star Master on the Atari 2600 made by Activision, in that you are in a spaceship and you go to your grid and you decide where you want to go on the map. Do you want to go off and fight the enemy ships, or do you want to dock at a base and repair your own ship? The choice is up to you. But basically, your goal is just to eliminate all the enemies in the sector, and you basically win the game, and you can either play again or try a harder level. It's as simple as that. It's a very straightforward game, and it's not bad at all. I wouldn't consider it to be a fantastical great game, but I'm definitely going to give it a 4 because it is a fun game nonetheless. And our 11th and final game on this cartridge is Xevious. This is the 8-bit Famicom/NES version from 1984. And again, this is another port of an arcade game, and it's not bad on the NES at all. Although I am not really the greatest Xevious fan of all time, I could get behind that it is a perfectly fine shooter with the added element that you have a separate button to be bombing ground targets at the same time. This may in fact have been the first game to allow you to do that. The thing I have a problem with this game is the fact that the enemy ships don't really fly in. They don't really seem to have really great pattern. They kind of overlap each other. It's kind of a bit messy the way they fly in and out of the screen. And I'm not really sure if this is limited to only the NES version or if this is present in the arcade version as well. I'm willing to bet that this is a case where the NES version is just not as good as the arcade original, but it still has its charms, so I'm gonna give this one a 4 because I still have a bit of fun playing it. Alright, and that's gonna wrap it up for Namco Museum Collection 1 on the Evercade. I think it's a pretty good collection. 7 out of the 11 games I gave either a 4 or 5 to, which are games that I will definitely go back and be playing again. Whereas the rest of them got 3s, which I feel were okay one way or another. I couldn't really give any of the games in this collection really a bad or a poor rating. I feel like there's merits in every single one of these games. And just because I like to average the scores of the game and kind of give this whole collection a total average score, and in this case we're looking at a 3.9, which compared to the other collections that I've done before this isn't bad at all. So I would recommend Namco Museum Collection 1 if you're a big fan of those early Namco games that were released on the Famicom that never came in the US, because there's a lot of them here. As for that, we're gonna end it here. And wait a minute, what's the next collection gonna be? I had to look it up. It's Atari Collection 2. That's the next one I'm going to be looking at. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.